A bullet whizzed past Brinkman's head. He crouched down and took refuge behind a large metal dumpster. "Oh, sweet Jesus, no!" O'Brien cried out behind him. Miller looked over his shoulder to see O'Brien cradling the blood-soaked head of his partner, right between the eyes. That's one hell of a lucky shot. Unless... "O'Brien, take cover!" Another bullet zipped by, striking the pavement near O'Brien's feet. Miller drew the Colt revolver from under his coat. He poked his head out from behind the dumpster for only a few seconds, long enough to survey the tall buildings up ahead and the myriad of open windows where a sharpshooter might perch. Where could he be shooting from and maintain that kind of accuracy? O'Brien sat motionless at Jenkins' side, hugging his partner's limp torso. "God damn it, O'Brien! I said get behind cover!" O'Brien laid Jenkins' head down and joined Miller behind the dumpster. A dark purple stain enveloped the abdomen and thighs of his cadet blue uniform. He gazed at the street, his bottom lip quivering. "Hey, listen to me." Miller put a hand on O'Brien's shoulder. "Jenkins is gone, and I know how hard that must be for you. But we're still alive, and if we're going to make it out of this, I need you to stay sharp and responsive to my commands. Can you handle that?" O'Brien met Miller's fiery gaze and nodded his head in response. "A nod isn't going to cut it. Can you put your feelings aside and follow instructions?" "Yes, sir." "Good. Then we may survive this yet." 3 against 1 odds had made Miller overconfident. In his experience, most criminals arm themselves with smaller weapons, pistols and revolvers, maybe the occasional automatic carbine, but only hunters carried rifles, and only military-trained individuals could master a long-range rifle such as the one this shooter was using. He'd underestimated the perp, and that miscalculation had cost the life of another officer. Miller looked into O'Brien's despondent eyes. "When the shock wears off, this kid will place the blame squarely on my shoulders, and maybe I deserve it. Right now we need to concentrate. One false step and it's lights out." "It's impossible to say for sure, but I think the bullets are coming from that building over there." Miller pointed toward a multi-story warehouse more than 30 yards away. "We're dealing with a man who has received sniper training, possibly ex-military. That being the case, it's imperative that you follow my directions to the letter." "Yes, sir," O'Brien said. Elevation gives him an advantage. We're like ducks in a shooting gallery down here on the ground. I doubt we'll be able to get back to the car and radio for help before he picks us off. Our only chance is to keep moving forward and take away his advantage by getting inside that building and forcing him to face us head on." O'Brien shivered. "Of course, that's easier said than done. If we run straight at him, we're dead." Miller traced imaginary lines on the concrete with his finger. "But if we run in a zigzag pattern, he shouldn't be able to line up his sight on us." O'Brien gulped. "Shouldn't?" "We'll space out our movements, go in short bursts," Miller said. "If we're smart, we can make it. I'll go first and draw his fire. Once I reach the checkpoint, I'll give you the signal to follow." "Where's the checkpoint?" Miller pointed to a pickup truck further ahead and across the street. "Over there. Now remember, don't move a muscle until I give you the signal. Got it?" O'Brien nodded. The plan was risky, but Miller saw no alternative. He inhaled a deep breath and held it as he sprinted across the street. He ducked behind the rear of the pickup truck and examined his person. No wounds. The gunman hadn't fired. Either he's saving his ammunition for a clearer shot, or he's toying with me. Miller checked on O'Brien. The officer was still crouching with his back against the dumpster, his eyes cinched tight and his body shaking. Damn it, he's going to get himself killed. "You ready?" Miller asked. O'Brien trembled so hard that his baton clanked against the metal dumpster. He nodded. "Go!" Miller shouted. O'Brien dashed out from behind the dumpster and ran toward the checkpoint. A lone gunshot echoed through the atmosphere, but O'Brien made it without getting hit. Spittle flew from his mouth, and he sucked rapid breaths in and out through his mouth. "There, that wasn't so hard, was it?" Miller patted him on the shoulder. "You sit back and catch your breath, and I'll go secure our next checkpoint." He scanned the landscape for defensible options, deciding on a beige Ford four-door parked in front of the warehouse. The car was a logical choice. It would provide more shelter than any of the other options available, but the distance between it and their position sent Miller's nerves into a frenzy. His hands began to tingle, and he quickly flexed his fingers. No time for panic attacks. I need to focus. Having stared down the cold gaze of death several times before, Miller recognized the severity of their predicament. His next step outside of cover could be his last. The warmth of the sun's rays on his face, the pleasant chirping of birds in song, the hint of caramel corn in the air wafting over from the nearby carnival, it could all be gone in seconds. Miller took another step forward and bolted toward the four-door with his head down, his heart pumping, and his adrenaline flowing. A gunshot rang out and sparks kicked up off the street, but the shooter had missed wide left. Miller arrived at the checkpoint unscathed, in a fraction of the time he'd anticipated it taking. That was close. Too close. I hope O'Brien's got some spring in those young legs of his. He waved his arm overhead. O'Brien knelt down like a runner in the starting blocks, preparing to test the shooter's aim. As Miller looked up at the building, he caught a glimpse of the gunman steadying his rifle on the windowsill. How had he reloaded so quickly? He was too late to stop O'Brien. He'd already made a break for the checkpoint. Miller devised a plan on the fly. He aimed his Colt revolver at the window and fired. The bullet struck a brick to the right of the frame, but Miller wasn't trying to hit the sniper. All he needed was a well-timed distraction, and it worked to perfection. The sniper recoiled from the open window, granting O'Brien safe passage across the street. "Good work, O'Brien," Miller said. "Now let's get in there and take this guy out. Stay vigilant and listen to my commands at all times. We still don't know who we're up against, and I'm not in the mood for any more surprises." O'Brien ground his teeth and nodded. The two men made their way to the front of the building and entered the premises through an open door with a busted lock. Miller took point with his revolver at the ready. "What is this place?" O'Brien asked. The only light source was the sunlight that spilled in through cracks in the deteriorated construction. An endless blanket of cobwebs had congealed against various pieces of machinery, and a collection of grime-covered hard hats. An iron spiral staircase in the middle of the floor provided access to the upper levels. Good question. Miller looked around the vacant space as his eyes adjusted to the low light. I don't think this is just an ordinary old warehouse. What makes you say that? I grew up around here, and it's been a warehouse for as long as I can remember. From the outside, anyway. Do you smell that? Miller asked. O'Brien sniffed. Yeah, what is that? Gunpowder. Miller inhaled through his nose. And something else, but your guess is as good as mine. Yeah, I can really smell it now. If I had to guess, this was probably once an arms repository, Miller said. Pretty common during World War II. Lots of facilities like this one were used to hoard valuable resources in case things got bad over here on U.S. soil. What do you think they did with all of it? Miller shrugged. Whatever it was, it's a ghost of... Heavy boots moved across the upper floor, heel-toe, heel-toe. Miller put a finger to his lips, then pointed toward the ceiling and approached the staircase. The footsteps grew louder and faster, moving from one end of the building to the other. Miller's heart thumped in his chest as they steadily climbed to the second floor. Not another step, a man shouted with an English accent. The hairs on Miller's arms stood at attention. A portly figure stood above them on the third-floor landing, with a rifle aimed at O'Brien's head. Throw down your guns, both of you. Miller nodded at O'Brien before laying his revolver on the ground. O'Brien followed his lead. Good lads, the gunman said. You know, I wasn't quite finished when you twats interrupted my work earlier. Oh, and she was a beauty. Sure to be a masterpiece. But I guess I'll never know now. For that you will pay. Look, we're unarmed, Miller said, Falms pacing outward. So how about you take your aim off my friend here, okay? The gunman moved his barrel to Miller. Are you the bloke in charge here, then? Miller glanced at O'Brien. The young officer stood against the railing, knees knocking together loud enough for Miller to hear. Yes. Actually, that is incorrect, he said. I'm the one in charge. Yes, of course. We're in accord. Smashing. Now I have an important question to ask you. Fear not, it's multiple choice. The gunman aimed his rifle at O'Brien again. Before you are two people whose lives are in grave danger, but you can only save one. You could take your friend and leave now, and no harm will come to either of you. That's a generous proposition. What's my other option? The gunman looked over his shoulder. Come here, love. A young blonde woman in a powder blue chiffon dress walked up to the railing, trembling, her mouth covered by a strip of masking tape. Dark mascara streaked down her wet cheeks. Miller stepped forward. The gunman banged his rifle against the railing, the sound echoing throughout the empty building. Don't move. Let her go, Miller said. This is between us. Ah, and that brings us to your other option, the gunman said. Which is? You could try running up the next flight of stairs and preventing me from killing her, and in fairness, you'd most likely succeed. A toothy smile stretched across the gunman's face. However, the second your foot touches that first step, I'll pull the trigger and blow your friend's head off. Neither of those sound like favorable scenarios, Miller said. Can't we try and work this out another way? No. These are your only options. Choose who lives and who dies. Simple as that. Miller looked at the woman and saw a beautiful face, a face he recognized. Carissa's face. He closed his eyes and shook his head. When he opened them, the vision was gone. Your time is running out, Trenchcoat, the gunman said. If you don't choose soon, I'll choose for you. I can't get a read on this guy at all. He's unpredictable, but if I don't come up with something fast, we're all dead.